Hi, my name's Audra Lambert, and I helm Anti-Mag as well as the Anti platform at the Yard Williamsburg Bridge. So a really big part of what I do is to provide opportunities for artists to exhibit. I think of myself as an editor. Also independently, I work as a curator, but I'm really seeking to form more collaborative connections in the community through what I do. I also serve as the head of Amos Eno Gallery since fall of 2020, and I live and work in New York City.
Wow. My name's Ellie Murphy, and I'm a sculptor, and I've been living in Queens for a while, for at least 20 years, I guess. And I've been in New York for a little longer than that. And I grew up in Kansas, in central Kansas, in a really small town of less than 3,000 people with one school. And now I'm living in the big city, so I'm really interested in those kind of scale issues of communities, something really small, something really large, something really individual, something really collective. And I guess for the last 10 years, I've been mostly working in fiber and found materials. And so in some ways, the way I work with fiber is kind of a metaphor for the individual strand in a larger piece. And even in the last year during COVID, I've been working a lot outdoors. And so my most recent pieces are all kind of strands of fringe that blow together in the wind. So so that's what I've been doing. I would say I made at least 3 large outdoor pieces in the last year with this kind of fringy format.
I really love how that resonates with the idea that, especially with the pandemic, we've had to be apart but are seeking ways to come together in moments.
Right. Or different ways, right?
Yeah.
Or rethinking what that means to be together in a weird way.
From my perspective as a curator, as an editor, I really frame everything that I do in terms of seeking out ways to collaborate. So a really big part of that has to do with finding avenues of connection. So everything that you've been saying about seeking out the individual versus the collective. One example of that, the work that I did at the Yard, through the pandemic, all of our exhibitions had to be virtual. So we did virtual tours. The artists were there in person to install, but obviously everyone was masked and we weren't really able to talk as much. But one thing that felt really especially poignant, at least in this shutdown, was this idea of experiencing the world, but from a distance, if that makes sense. So I did a show called Along the M Train, which, because you're in Ridgewood, you understand when you're on the M Train on the subway, you get these like really small glimpses into people's lives, whether it's into the, like, say through an apartment window or into maybe a backyard or the side of a building. So where I'm at the Yard, it actually also overlooks the M train. We're on the 4th floor, so you can see the train as it passes by. So I flipped that. So the idea being that throughout the exhibition at the Yard, this was in early 2021, you would see the kind of artwork that would be seen from the train, and it was inside of the gallery space. So we had works by Keisha Prolin Martin, who I had a video interview with as a part of that exhibition. Ayane Karai. It was a range of artists who were really providing kind of insights into everything from how you would see streetlights as you're riding the train. So we had works by Jason Clay Lewis that were more abstracted, that felt as though you were seeing things like if the train's moving very quickly. We had some works by John Elliott that felt as though they were streetlights that were cutting through. So the idea there was also that every artist actually lived and or worked along the M train.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So one of the artists, actually, her name is Carrie Amanati. She was literally a 3-block walk for me when I was in Ridgewood.
Wow. What street did you live on in Ridgewood?
I was on, sorry. I was right off of Forest Ave, but 61st. Okay. So it wasn't far away.
Yeah. I'm at the Seneca stop.
Oh, so, okay. Yeah, you're only one over.
Yeah, I love those kind of overlaps. Or it's such a great idea for a show, just because I live on the M train. I love that idea. That's fantastic.
And also the way the streets connect there are at really odd angles, right?
Everything is. Yeah, and I don't know if you know this, but if you look at the M train, underneath it is a streetcar line. Like it was built as an elevated train. The original train that went out to Ridgewood is a streetcar that goes.
How did you find that out?
Well, you can just walk and you can still see the streetcar line.
Wow.
In some, it probably paved a lot more of it over now, but sometimes under the M train you can see the old streetcar. It used to be a streetcar. Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
So do you find that you've had a chance to form connections with other artists in the area?
Yeah, definitely. I have, I'm just starting to go to real in-person art openings, and this might have been one of the first that I've really felt like was an almost a normal art opening. There's an artist named Carrie Law in my neighborhood. Do you know him?
Mm-mm.
He actually paints a lot of cemetery stones, and he paints gravestones, and he's in a show now in Ridgewood, and so he's a Ridgewood artist. And I know a lot of people in the neighborhood that are artists, but I've been in New York for so long.
And how has that impacted your practice?
I think when you're young and you first move to New York, you go like, New York, the whole huge city, and I want to know everything, and I'm young, and we're all young artists, and you go out and you meet as many people as possible, and you can go to every art opening. And you think, and of course back in the day you really could. It wasn't, New York has got so much more, such a much larger art world now, and I moved to Williamsburg in the 90s. So that was when that was a small alternative art community filled with artists. And almost every artist I knew lived in Williamsburg at the time. So it was very dense, very compact. You sometimes felt like I never have to leave my neighborhood.
Well, that was before the Apple Store was there. So it was a very different vibe.
That was before there was a bank machine.
Right,
exactly. There was like one bank machine in Greenpoint. I mean, now that I'm older, I feel like, that's interesting. Like I think of Ridgewood as my neighborhood, my immediate neighborhood, my friend group, the artists that I'm friends with. And I don't have the idea that I'm going to know everybody now. Like I think it's not that it's not part of my community. I think you focus in maybe on, like, there's a lot of work that I don't think about, so you do, I think you get more narrow, you get more focused, and you dig a little deeper into your community. But that doesn't mean that you're not like all of a sudden, whoa, here's a whole new tangent.
Yeah, it has a lot more visibility now as an artist neighborhood. I would say even than like 5 or 6 years ago.
Oh yeah, it wasn't an artist neighborhood when I moved.
Right, or it was maybe for some people that knew that artists were there. Yeah,
or it was close to where people's studios were too. So it was pretty, it's really close to Bushwick. So
well, it's interesting. Everything that you've said, I think I've actually had a chance to learn over the past year working at Amos Eno Gallery as their director, because they started in the year 1974 in Soho, way back when Soho was really an artist-first neighborhood. It wasn't so commercial. It wasn't highly branded, right? So artists there really were scrappy and lived in lofts. And so all of the artists, we have the single original member, Jose Pressman, who is our head of the board. And he was there in sort of that spirit of like a do-it-yourself kind of a grassroots, we will make this work somehow financially from an organizational standpoint. And through the years, they were pushed kind of around from Soho to like maybe Chelsea and then over to Dumbo because Manhattan just became really, really prohibitive. However, for the past several years, we've been based in Bushwick.
Oh, wow.
Which I think like if you're thinking about artists and communities now, the most, from my perspective at least, the first neighborhood that sort of comes to mind, at least in Brooklyn, would be Bushwick. So it's been interesting to see, because you think of a community, but it's also kind of a mobile space, like especially in response to the shutdown, a lot of communities had to go virtual. So like, what is a community? Is it more of a geographic sort of organizational point? Is it virtual? Is it something that exists like outside of a place, or does it need to be rooted in a place? I want to hear, because you've been in Bushwick, in Ridgewood so long, I want to hear.
Well, I think that's a great question, because I also don't think that there's one answer to it. Like I think that our technology, and this is what the pandemic has proven, is that, and I wonder if you're really young, like, I don't think that sense of place is as important to young people now, although it's more important in a different way, like my son is 20. And he's not an artist. He's not really interested in the art world, but he's been a part of it his whole life, and he really thinks of our neighborhood as his neighborhood. But what he does as a person, he's online all the time. these kids are native to the space that's or the community online. So I guess when you talk about community, I think about, well, there's my community where I live and my people. Then there's the larger art world, which changes over time, and it expands. And then there's the sense of community in virtual community, which I'm a sculptor, so I don't love the idea of virtual community.
Definitely.
The more that happens, the more I think, my work is just about the here and now and the stuff and the wind blowing through the fiber and the kind of real world, but the virtual world is part of our world. So I'm not against it. I just love the idea of how they come and they go. And New York, Soho, I remember Soho, when there were still ground floor galleries in Soho.
Yeah.
My teacher in graduate school, we all came down on the train and we went to his show at the Althea Viafori Gallery, which was at the corner of Broadway and Prince.
Yeah,
and it's it's an Armani store now.
Yeah.
But it used to be an alternative gallery. So after a while, you realize those things always change, and some of them are, but we must hang on to something that's not just about real estate or location or with community. Because the neighborhood in Brooklyn that used to be the artist neighborhood was Williamsburg. But now when you say Williamsburg, it hardly even seems like New York. I think of it more as like the way, it's a tourist neighborhood now, really. When you go over there, it seems like people coming to visit New York and seeing it's completely different than it was in the 90s, say.
Definitely.
And the only other thing I was going to say is that I had this experience that I stayed in New York for the entire pandemic in Queens, but I'm older and I have a lot of friends that moved upstate to the Hudson Valley and they either had country houses up there or they got one or they have families. And I just did a show in Kingston at a place called Artport. Kingston is really far away, but now it sort of seems like part of my artist community, in a weird way, because I have friends up there.
Yeah.
And I think it's
malleable. The work I do as the curator in residence at the Yard Williamsburg Bridge, I have to think of the communities outside of the art communities because it's within, it's a corporate space, it's an office space. So I've had conversations, and actually a lot of the workers there have a very different background from my own. I was raised Roman Catholic and it's a very strong Hasidic community. So I've had interesting conversations. A lot of the work I have there is abstract out of respect for the communities there, but I've had some interesting conversations, especially around the fiber artists and the fiber artworks that I've had there. I think because if you're thinking of kind of a cross-section of everyone else's background, like if you think of either textiles or fiber arts, it really has a tangible presence in a lot of people's lives in a way that maybe a painting doesn't. So I think to think about the way that things either translate in terms of scale or material is one way to really start having a conversation with people that aren't really necessarily in and of the art world.
Did you grow up in New York or?
No, New Orleans.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I was raised by the water. So
you just came here to go to City College then?
No. I've been here for 15 years.
Hi, Victoria. How are you?
Hi, Barry.
Nice to meet you. Art and communities, that's what we're here to talk about. Tell me a little bit about yourself and what you've done in communities and your art.
Well, I live and work in Brooklyn. I make installations in public spaces. My last project was on Governor's Island. And I also work as a teaching artist in public schools and galleries and museums. So my work is really focused on bringing people together and activating community spaces.
What materials do you use in your collages and installations?
I use a variety of non-traditional materials, pink sand, rope, cast glass, neon, cast plastic, fake grass, and plastic flowers are some of the things that I've used in the past. But it really depends on each site-specific location. And I often reuse materials for green purposes, but also I like to bring in my installations and sort of recycle them in my classroom. So I like to reuse some of those installations and turn my classroom into installations to sort of bring my projects to my students.
Would you say your work is narrative? Does it have a storyline? Is it personal expressions of yourself? How would you describe?
It usually starts out that way, but I really like to leave it open to the viewer and allow them to connect the dots themselves. I like to use humor as well. So there's usually some, sort of connections with pop culture, cartoons. And what I find is when I show my students images of my work, that they usually connect to it through animated cartoons and the bright colors. So I think in whichever way people access the work, I'm pretty happy with. So I try not to be super serious about messaging and content, but I am interested in bringing people together and having them sort of think about things.
How do you balance being a teacher and an artist? Does one feed the other? Does one block the other? Does it inform? How does it relate with you and your specific situation?
It's tricky. For me, being a teacher is more of an activist position. I got into teaching first through university teaching, but then as a teaching artist in public schools through nonprofits. My real interest in teaching is creating the next generation of thinkers. So my interest is sort of giving young people the tools to make great art, but also to be able to think critically about the world around them. And also, kids are weird and wild, and I kind of like that about them. It is tricky to juggle, so I find myself working seasonally, but I also find that my process making larger installations is somewhat seasonal, because there's a application process and a funding sort of process as well. So it does work out that I do have ebb and flows of work that seem to work well with my teaching artist schedule.
I have worked with kids. I'm not a certified teacher. I went to school. I was a math major in college. Visual arts I did when I was very young, a RISD program. So I had a lot of exposure and I had exhibits and things like that. But I went into a family business and sort of did many other things along the way. I have come back around. I'm 60. In the last 15 years, I've done many things in education, whether it's going inside a hospital and doing art therapy with cancer patients, working with kids at risk, teens, working with young people, a variety of groups, and also a double-door psychiatric ward. I sort of I have a passion for arts. I think artists, everything they do really is individual in a way, but sometimes we do an individual thing with community. So I very much enjoy drawing and being on my own in nature. At the same time, I think we're fed by community. And so it seemed natural, even though I wasn't a teacher, to go help where people needed it. And it's not necessarily inside the art world. I did in the South Bronx, where my family's metalworking factory was in business. I did open a gallery. I had no intentions of it, but one day I thought, I'm an artist. I'd love to have exhibits. I know what that feels like. What if I instead opened a gallery and then hundreds of artists, I could satisfy that for them. So to some extent, you place other artists in front of yourself, but there are multiple benefits from seeing the other side of the coin. Being a gallerist, I was in a dynamic area. A lot happened between 1995 and 2010 in the Mott Haven area in the South Bronx. So fast forward recently, I've worked with kids in ceramics in a day camp, and I've done group projects. And I like to, art can be individual, but I've given them all clay, had them make things and put them together and later glaze them in impossible scenarios. Too many kids, not enough room. And I make them work through it. They have to come up with a solution. So I think it can bring people together in very good ways. I do run a nonprofit now. We do talks on art, and that brings artists together to share. And some artists learn some real tricks about materials Some get some new ideas. Others just share and feel good to hear their work appreciated, or others to appreciate others' work. So,
yeah, I think it's also important to give students the language to talk about art, and also to make them feel, in my opinion, to make them feel like they're welcome in places that art is made and exhibited. A lot of my students don't have a lot of access to galleries and museums. So it's really important for me to make them feel like that's a space for them and a space that they can go to and that they will know what they're talking about. So that's really important for me. And so I do some work with a nonprofit in Red Hook called the Kentler International Drawing Space, where we do classes for families in the gallery, and we talk about the artwork and use the materials the artists use and explore things there. But the idea is really that people come into the space, feel welcome, and feel like they can make art too, that it's not this elite place and this place that's for someone else other than them. And that's what I hope to do in public schools as well, as part of my job. But I think that's also true about public art. You know, when you put something in a public place, like your gallery, you have to be very aware of everyone that's passing by and how to activate the space, but also be interesting to everyone, not just a very particular kind of person, or at least that's my interest. I mean, how do you see activating public areas?
So I've done that. What I call hit. I've hit fire hydrants and certain objects.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a graffiti writer, but I do get the urge. I used to do a thing where I used gold spray paint, did some rocks. And when I had my gallery, not only did we bring kids to the city, to museums to see things like that, but we had kids come for classes that were free. And I had kids actually doing street art, little kids with masks on. It was really cute. It was really something. But, you know, it was totally wild because in essence, it was illegal. So I look like if you're beautifying it, if you're, you know, upping the space visually, and sometimes the space really needs it because the history of graffiti is it's not done on Rodeo Drive. It's done in the inner city where things are in bad shape.
Right, and now it's elevated, but I think the fact that you chose to open a gallery space in the South Bronx is significant because you weren't choosing to open a space where the other galleries were.
In Chelsea, I had friends say to me, why don't you do it there? Why don't you do it there? And you know what the odd benefit was? When I went to events that the Bronx Museum hosted, they actually called me out, and I was friendly with Holly Block. Since the Bronx was so small, it was good to be a big fish in a small pool, whereas in New York City, I would have been one new gallerist amongst many. And Holland Cotter wrote us up very early on. We had international press. We did a lot of unsung artists, and then we did some very famous artists. Vito Conchi showed with us, Fred Wilson. So it was a lot of fun. Tim Rollins. I reached into the history and the community of the Bronx. I've often thought as an artist, I'm better off to just go draw in the woods because I do that. I enjoy it. I've done it for 30, 40 years. I go out and I paint in a serene setting. Same setting, 15 years. All the paintings are always a little different. You know, do I do the Thoreau thing, or do I live a normal life and do I react to culture? And what I've learned is we are community beings. I see it as like, you know, ants are part of a colony. Bees are part of a hive. I've set up an odd community through Zoom. And I think we are meant to be here to be together. There's some other higher order that brings us to community because we're mutually beneficial to each other. It could be as simple as body heat, but I think it's a lot more complicated. I think it's a lot of connectedness we don't see. So community is important, and I just naturally express it. I don't do it with intention. I know that sounds silly. I just do sometimes things that feel right. My gallery, no idea. Friend says, hey, we could open a gallery. This place was $800 a month. I'm like, yeah. So,
yeah, it sounds like a fun time. I also think it's important, though, for people to see things happening where they are in their neighborhood, and that artists exist outside of general spaces like museums. that there isn't artists in their neighborhood that they can meet, that they're not these like mythic
I did a lot of
humans.
exhibits inside banks. I did exhibits inside the library. I had artists come inside the library and do art programs. I think one thing you learn is if you walk through the museums, a lot of wealthy foreigners speaking different languages, not the average New York City person. So you really have to bring the arts to them. And this is all positive stuff. Art is enriching. It's enlightening. It's a good thing. I mean, yeah, we could argue over the principle and concepts in a painting, but this is as far from war as you can go.
You know, when it comes to my work, I mean, I know you're talking about going to the woods and finding like these serene places. I know that with COVID, my work has changed drastically because I haven't had the community in the same way interacting with my work. I've been working more paper-based, smaller scale in my studio in Brooklyn. So it's a very different mindset, but I kind of feel, again, like it's part of that cycle of sort of like the ideas are sort of like marinating and forming while I'm doing other things, and then things will shift when the time is right to go back out and do more public projects. I mean, for me, I've been figuring out how to shift my teaching practice to be communal-based but online, and how to make engaging videos and films and things for people to watch asynchronously. So I'm, sort of trying to reinvent a lot of different things at the same time.
And artists are going from working maybe just in drawing to maybe they go digital now because they're at home. And I've heard a lot of artists talk about working on smaller scale. There are a lot of commonalities about people's reaction to COVID. And that's the whole point about community.